Welcome to Effective Bible Teaching. In addition to your reading, we want to talk about a few educational concepts and try to relate those back to your text. So we're going to begin with a definition of what learning means. In a word, how would you define learning? That is, if you could only have one word to describe what learning is, what would it be? Now, in a normal classroom setting, I would ask this and I get lots of different kinds of responses, and this might be some of them that you're thinking of. Think of it for a second. What one word could you use to define learning? Would it be something like scholarship, or knowledge, education, intellect, enlightenment, illumination, edification, information, understanding, wisdom? These are all great words, and some of these are very synonymous with learning. But I use a different word. The word I use to describe learning is the word change. Change. Learning is change. Of course, the question now becomes a change in what? What is changed in the learning process? Let me give you 4 examples, and then we'll answer that question. The first example here is, say a person cannot recall the names of the books of the New Testament, and after a teaching session, the learner can then repeat them from memory. So in this case, what changed? Well, obviously, they could not repeat the names, and now they can. So what changed was their ability to recall the specific facts, right? They had a change in knowledge. It was a cognitive change in their thinking, and they had information they could now recall that they couldn't recall before. Okay, so that change in knowledge. Here's another example. A learner cannot explain what learning means. After a class session, she can explain clearly in her own words what changed. Well, this is a little different than the first one. The first one was just repeating facts that had been learned. Well, this is actually explaining something. So there's a change in some level of her understanding, right? If she could repeat in her own words or explain in her own words something that she didn't understand beforehand, guess what? That shows a change in her understanding, which is also part of the cognitive domain in the thinking, but at a different level. Here's another example. A student does not want to tithe. After attending a Sunday school class for several weeks, he observes his teacher who gives with great joy. On Pledge Day, the student signs a pledge card to tithe. What changed? Well, you could say, well, possibly the student's understanding of tithing changed. You could also say that the student's knowledge of tithing changed. But the key here is the student did not want to tithe, and afterward, after seeing the example by his teacher, he willingly, voluntarily signed that pledge card. So there is some change in the student's attitude, which is in the affective domain, what deals with attitudes and values. And here's the last example. A learner cannot beat 4/4 time in directing music. After some training, she can do so without error. What changed? Well, you could say that there was maybe some understanding that changed and knowledge that changed, and certainly maybe an attitude if they didn't want to, although that's not clear here. What really we know did change is a skill, a psychomotor skill. The student was able to do a physical psychomotor skill that they weren't able to do before. In this case, it's directing out a 4/4 time signature. Well, in this case, we see, and in these 4 cases, we see really the universe of change that we focus in on in learning, and that is knowledge, understanding, attitude, and skill. So I'm going to change or actually enhance the definition of education or learning to be this. Learning means a change in knowledge, understanding, attitude, or skill. Okay? A change in knowledge, understanding, attitude, and skill. And I'm adding on here how that happens. It's brought about by experience. Now, experience includes what? Pretty much everything. Experience means anything that learner comes in contact with that would be considered something they could that they perceived in their life, that any experience that they could claim as their own, that any changes that are brought about by that experience would be considered learning. And that means learning could be good and bad, right? It could be things that you could learn bad habits, you could learn bad knowledge, bad information, bad attitudes, learn how to do bad things poorly, psychomotor wise. So this is a very general definition, but our I hope, is that as you interact with your students and you give them structured experiences in the classroom, that you will create meaningful change in one or more of these areas of knowledge, understanding, attitude, and skill. And so we'll use this definition as our guide. Now, one thing I'd like you to do is I'd like you to take this definition, and every word that's underlined, I would like you to put your own word or phrase in there. So drop out the word change, knowledge, understanding, attitude, skill, and experience, and I would like you to create your own definition with replacing those words. So learning means, well, you can't say change, so learning means a what? Growth maybe in, or whatever the words are, you need to change those words, put your own words in there, and I want you to email that to me because I want to see how you will kind of define this this definition with using your own words. Okay, so that's the next just a little quick exercise here, and I want you to email that to me. Okay. All right. Well, now we know that learning means change. So now we need to begin to discuss the process of making that learning and that change happen in our learners. So we're talking about primary outcomes. We have to target the kind of changes we wish to make in our learners. So the question is, what specifically are you trying to accomplish in this lesson? What changes do you want to see, you want to make in your learner or facilitate in your learner when they go through that lesson? And what change do you hope to have accomplished by the end of that 50-minute session with them, or the end of that semester, or whatever it is? If you don't have a goal, if you don't have a primary outcome in that lesson or in that unit of study or in that semester, if you don't have goals, then you're like the guy who shoots an arrow into the air and tries to chase it with the target. Sometimes we teach without a target. Then we race to move the target to where the arrow went. I mean, that's ridiculous, right? The guy takes an arrow, shoots it into the forest, and then runs over with a little paint bucket. And when he sees it stuck into a tree, he paints a target around the arrow and says, "Hey, look, we made a bullseye." Well, a lot of times that's what our teaching is like. We just kind of throw it out there. We just kind of teach the way we know best, and we hope that something's accomplished. And when something is accomplished, we go, "Well, hey, they learned." And if it's not accomplished, well, then, something went wrong. Maybe the students were just too tired or whatever. And we've got a lot of excuses for a lot of really bad things happening in the classroom. So we're going to begin with focusing on primary outcomes. We set up a specific target, and we aim everything we do in the classroom at that single target. Okay, we set up a target. I want to accomplish this in this time. So here's an example. Oh, by the way, we call that target our lesson aim, or our lesson goal, or our teaching goal, or our teaching objective. Okay, I typically call it a goal. Okay, I think your text calls it a lesson aim, and it's created in terms of a domain or level of learning. So I will choose whatever domain or levels of learning I'm trying to reach with that content, and then I set up that aim. So here's an example. Okay, here's a very clear teaching goal. The learner will demonstrate knowledge of the order of the kings of Israel by naming them chronologically. Okay, so in this lesson, I want my students I want them to know knowledge, the lowest level of the cognitive domain. I want them to know and be able to recite the order of the kings of Israel. And what's notable here is I want them to demonstrate that by naming them chronologically, so I know that they've got it. That's called an indicator. This, by naming them chronologically, is an indicator. This tells me if they can do this, then I know that they know the order of the kings of Israel, right? That's how they're going to prove to me that they have reached that goal. But the most important part of this right now is the fact that I have set a specific goal in terms of the domain of the level of learning. In this case, it's knowledge, and I want them to be able to show that that knowledge to me. And everything I do for the next 50 minutes, or however long this lesson is, will be to help the learner accomplish this goal, to be able to know the order of the kings of Israel. Okay? Now, what I'm going to do right now is take you through a very, very quick survey of the the cognitive and affective domains. We won't do psychomotor right now. And I want to give you those levels of learning so you can see those and kind of be familiar at least with the titles of those. We'll go back and examine those a little more detail later on. But I'm going to do this because I want you to know what those levels are, because your text presents its own version of those. And I want to be able to relate those back so you have a kind of an idea of where your text is coming from. So I'm going to, sorry about that. I'm going to start with the cognitive domain here. Okay, so the cognitive domain is the thinking, is the our ability to think and think at different levels. And the more complex the level, the higher we go. So we start at the bottom. The bottom is just knowledge, and knowledge is nothing more than just the recall of facts. It's the remembering of previously learned material, and there's it could be remembering just your name and your address, or it could be knowing a wide range of information, but it's simply the recall of facts. And this, by the way, is known as is not considered understanding. This knowledge is not understanding. It is simply it is simply just recall. Okay, and if you know something, that's fine, but it isn't until we start with comprehension and go up here that we're actually in the realm of understanding. So the next one is comprehension. Comprehension is defined as the ability to grasp the meaning of material. So when you get to this first level here, this means you actually begin to understand the material. It's something you could recite a Bible verse from knowledge, but not have any idea what it means. But when you get to comprehension, this is where you begin to understand what it says. An example of comprehension would be to take, well, look at an example, that verse that I told you, or that, not the verse, but the definition I told you to rephrase in your own words. If you were able to take those words out that were underlined, put your own words in there, and rephrase that definition in your own words, that's an example of comprehension. That would be at that level. Application is the ability to learn, to take learned material and then to use it in new situations, in new and concrete situations. So application is a taking a material and applying it in a new and concrete situation. Okay, so if I know how to do addition, for instance, I take one number and I add another number, which increases the amount by that second number, and I have now my result, or my sum. Well, if I give you two new numbers to work with, and you are able to do that same process of taking the first number and then adding the number of the second number to it, and then I come up with a bigger number that's the sum, well, now I've applied the concepts of addition in a new and concrete situation. Okay, analysis goes even a little higher here. Analysis is refers to the ability to break down material into its component parts. Okay, so that its structure may be understood, and the pieces and the parts of that puzzle can be understood. So analysis is the breaking down to better analyze, to better understand the parts of the whole. Synthesis is even a little higher here. Synthesis is the taking of individual parts and bringing them together to create a new whole. Okay, so synthesis, whereas analysis is the breaking down to understand something, synthesis is the creation of something new. It's the bringing together of different parts and different. It could be concepts. It could be different actual physical parts of a product, and bringing it together to make a new whole. And an evaluation is the highest level of the cognitive domain, and it's concerned with the ability to judge the value of material of something, whether it be a statement, a concept, a theory, and these judgments are based on the predefined criteria. So an evaluation, think about somebody comes in who's an evaluator. They are looking at predefined criteria and evaluating if that thing, that performance, that building, that concept, whatever, is meets certain criteria. Okay, and that's the highest level there. So I just wanted you to be aware of these. We will talk about these in more detail. Know, though, that knowledge is in it by itself as the lowest level, and these other 5 are considered understanding. Okay, so these ones are understanding up here, and this is knowledge. And by the way, knowledge is not understanding. So you see there's a difference there. Okay, the next ones I want to show again briefly is those of the affective domain. Now, the affective domain has 5 levels, and this deals with not thinking. This is with your values and attitudes. Okay, and so the first level is that of receiving. Let me change the color here so a little bit easier to see when I write on it here. So valuing. So the first is receiving. Now, receiving means that you are aware of something, and that information is being brought into your level of consciousness. So receiving information of value means that you're at least aware of it. But that's it. You're aware of it. You've attuned to it, but you've not. That's it. Now, when you go to responding, now responding means that there's some small commitment of time or interest to that value. Okay, so receiving is simply being aware of it. Responding means, I'm interested in learning more about this. So responding is some very small commitment to it, to explore that value or understand more. Now the third level here, valuing, this is where you actually give some amount of worth to that, to the attitude or that value, where you think, this is important. And valuing is where you talk it up and say, yeah, I think this is important to me. Whereas receiving, responding, there's no worth given to that thing, that value, that attitude. Valuing is now starts to become important to you. And organizing is where you begin to organize your life in such a way that value is brought into your everyday kind of living. So this becomes now where you actually are acting on that value, and you have to reprioritize your life in order to bring that value in and begin to live it. And characterization is this is basically living a life that displays or reflects that value over time. So characterization, if you are characterized by that value, then in that case, you're at that level of characterization, and that only happens over time. Okay, so again, we'll look at these in more detail later, but I at least wanted you to see these, because what we're going to talk about next is how these are kind of being used in the levels that your text gives you. So we're going to look at those right next, and hopefully this will make sense as we move forward. By the way, when we're teaching, we're going to be teaching to some of these levels. So I want to teach at the level of application. I want to teach at the level of organizing. So my learners have to be able to organize that value into their life, or need to analyze the material that I'm teaching them, or maybe just know it, like, for instance, the order of the kings of Israel. So knowing these, we know exactly how to create those specific teaching aims. Okay. I've got some more erasing to do here. Okay, so now Richards and Redfeld introduced a simplified version of these levels of learning that combine aspects of the cognitive and the affective domains. So what they did is they created this. This is in your text. And what we see here is these 5 levels: rote, recognition, restatement, relation, and realization. And as you read these, a couple things come to mind. First off, you can probably recognize what these are, like rote, ability to repeat without thought of meaning. Now what does that sound like? Well, it obviously sounds like knowledge, right? It's rote memory, recall of facts, and that's exactly what it is. So this first one, they say, is just basically, spilling out what you've memorized. That's rote, okay? And the second one, which is seems a little more complex, recognition, ability to recognize biblical concepts. Recognition really is just another form of knowledge. I can recognize, I may not understand it, but I can certainly recognize it. Which one of these does not fit? Oh, well, yeah, I didn't learn that one fit, so I know that doesn't fit, but I may not understand why it doesn't fit, and I may not understand what the concept or whatever it is anyway. So, these 2 lower levels here really are, again, he says it here, facts, but they're insufficient for really Christian teaching. Now, you got to start there, but he wants us to go up further here to these higher levels. Okay, by the way, as I move on, just know that here the teacher's role here moves from telling to guiding. Okay, so on the lower level here, the teacher's telling, and then as we move into restatement, relation, and realization, the teacher now is more in the guiding role. Okay, so as we move across here, we're more of guides. And notice here that the emphasis is facts here, but then we move into meaning, and that's basically meaning outside of me, meaning in a greater, world, in this case a worldview or a theology or biblical Christianity, whatever you want to call it. And here, as we get over to this area, is more meaning in terms of me and my life. Okay, so this is meaning, this is personal meaning over here. All right, so let's move to the next one. Next level is restatement. Now restatement kind of moves over from this area over here to over here. So we're going from knowledge now into meaning, which means there has to be some level of understanding. And certainly it is. This would be the lowest level of the cognitive domain, comprehension. Okay, so now we're in understanding. And restatement, ability to express or relate concepts to biblical systems of thought. This is making sure that you comprehend these things and how they kind of relate to, in this case, a biblical worldview. When I gave you again that little example of the definition of learning, and I asked you to restate it in your own words, that's exactly what we're doing here. We're restating it, and that's at that level of comprehension, as I told you. So when you do that, you've shown me that you've now moved it from just memorizing that definition to actually understanding it. Okay, we go to the next one, which is relation. And relation is the ability to relate Bible truths to life and see appropriate responses. Now, this goes, and you notice this little dashed line here. Now we're moving again into a different area where it's not just understanding the meaning of it, but it's understanding the meaning of it in terms of my life's experiences. And this now has kind of shades of not just cognitive but also affective, where there's certain kinds of values that are being given worth here. So we would see this as being not just application. Okay, it's a higher level of the cognitive domain, application. It's taking a concept and using it in a new situation, my life. But it also has this component, this affective component of valuing, that I actually ascribe some worth to whatever it is that I'm learning about here. Worth enough to begin to think about how I would use it in my life and bring it into my own value system. Okay, so this is a higher level here, and this is kind of where we want to be. And even further than that, we move from not just how does it relate to my life, but then we go here to realization, where it actually becomes part of my daily life. And this is where I start to live it out. And can you guess where that would be on the cognitive and affective domain? It's definitely a combination of application again. It could even be higher than that. It could actually be synthesis at some level, and even evaluation. But at least it's application. And we know that we've moved from not just the valuing, but to the organizing, where I have to kind of rearrange my priorities to live that value out. So I'm applying that idea in a new situation, and I'm organizing my life to actually move that into use, and it's being actually realized in my life. So this concept here, and by the way, the top two are where we want to be with our learners. We want them to not just realize that concept and how it should work in their life, but also live it out, the realization part. So what Richards and Redfield have done is they've taken those two domains of cognitive and affective, and they've kind of combined them to help us understand where we need to be in terms of our teaching and our outcomes, our primary outcomes for our learners. Okay, so we've looked at that material, those 5 levels in the book, and I want to leave you with a couple more definitions that are not necessarily in your text. One of them, of course, we looked at is the learning definition. Here's another one: diffusion of learning. Now, diffusion of learning is learning that is aimed at a specific domain. Well, let me restate that. diffusion learning is this. Learning that is aimed at a specific domain just affects naturally other domains. It spills over into the other domains. So if I'm focused on, for instance, teaching for at some cognitive level, I'm trying to teach math and how to do formulas in math. What's going to happen is I want to not just teach that, but also there's going to be a spillover into the affective. And what that means is that the student's not just going to learn math, but they're also going to develop an attitude about math. And it might be because of their hardship, or maybe their ease of doing it. It's also going to come from the teacher's attitude. So diffusion learning refers to this fact that even though I'm focused on a specific area, a specific level, a specific domain of learning, and I want that student to get it at that level, I also realize that there will be learning in other areas as well that I'm not even maybe aware of. Here's another example. If I'm teaching a psychomotor skill, say I am a teacher of teaching violin. Well, the learner will learn the psychomotor skill of playing the violin, but the learner is also going to learn cognitively. They're going to learn things to think, how to think better as they're learning to play, and they're also going to learn attitudes about playing. And it will come from me as the instructor. It might come from their own fears and their own expectations. So the diffusion learning is this idea that yes, we focus our teaching in a specific area, but we realize that learning will happen in other areas as well that we really don't control. So that's diffusion learning. The next thing I want to talk about is transfer learning. Now this is in your text, the transfer of learning. And this is the ability to use concepts learned in one context successfully in another context. And this is probably the biggest goal for us, is to make sure that when we teach something in the classroom, our students are able to take that learning and apply it and use it outside in another context in their life out there. So that is really what this whole idea of transfer of learning is about, to take it out of the classroom and to use it. Your text also talks about meaningfulness, how we have to give what we teach, the content that what we teach, meaning to the students, so they get it, they understand it, and it gives them, it has meaning. And I'm not just talking about personal meaning. I'm talking about just understandability, that they understand the material. And your text talks about order and structure helps with that. When things have order and structure, it's much easier to get. Using a vocabulary that they understand, so using language, because if they don't know the language of how you're describing something, then it makes it more difficult to learn it, and the meaning is lost. And also linking the new learning to old learning. So this linking to life experiences gives them meaning as well, meaning that they have understanding of their own life's experiences. They know what they've experienced. They have certain knowledge and understanding of those things that are in their past. If you could link the new learning to something they've experienced in their past, then that gives it more a better chance of being understood. And let's see. And the text also talks about teaching creatively for the transfer of learning, and there's three contrasts that they draw. The first is focusing on facts versus focusing on meaning. And of course they say, don't just focus on facts, focus on creating the meaning with that material and make that material meaningful to the learner. The second thing is focusing on student activity rather than passivity. So allow the student to be active rather than to sit and listen. And again, as you move if you move up the ladder on their 5 levels there, the teacher becomes less of a teller and more of a guide, which is exactly the next one. And so as the student is more passive, the teacher has to be more of a teller. But as the student becomes more active, then the teacher becomes more of a guide, which is what you want. This reminds me of a great analogy given to me by Dr. Richard Ross. And just imagine that you are visiting some caverns that we have over here, not terribly far from where I live in Texas, is the Carlsbad Caverns in New Mexico, Carlsbad, New Mexico. And this is actually the front of the entrance to the cavern, to the caves. Imagine that you take a bunch of students, and you load them up on the bus, and you drive all the way to Carlsbad Caverns, and you get out of the bus, and you sit down here in these nice little rock benches, and you can see the park ranger standing there talking to the people. And the park ranger says something like this. He says, "Thank you for coming to Carlsbad Caverns. These caverns are amazing, and I've spent my life in these caverns, researching them, understanding the caverns. They're beautiful. There's so much wonderful things in the caverns. The depth of the caverns and the beauty is just unimaginable. And I'm so glad you're here to learn about these caverns. So go ahead and sit back, relax, and for the next hour and a half, I'm going to tell you what I've learned about these caverns, and I'm going to just hopefully just really tell you so much about the wonderful facts of the caverns." And so just sit back, and then so the park ranger does, and for the next hour and a half, she tells all about the stalagmites and the stalactites and the bacon and the ribbon and the soda straws and all the different formations that are in there. And then after the hour and a half is over, she says, "Well, I'm so glad you guys came to the caverns. I hope that you have a great trip home, and make sure to tell your friends about it." And so everybody gets up, and they get on the buses, and they go home. Well, that's what a lot of our teaching is like. We've spent a lot of time in the Word, and we're students at the seminary, and we're learning God's Word and how to study the Bible. And then the students come, and they sit down at the mouth of the cave, at the mouth of that deep and rich, the mysteries of God's Word. And we say, "Hey, I've studied this. I've spent my life studying this." And so sit back and relax for the next 50 minutes, and I'm going to tell you what I've learned. And because there's just so much wonderful things to learn about God's Word. I'm just going to tell you. And so 50 minutes go by, and then we say, "Okay, we give the offering, we say our prayers, and we go home and eat potato salad." I mean, that's pretty much what we do every week. But what should we do? What really happens at the caverns? Well, there might be a little bit of instructions given by the ranger, but then she turns around and she walks down that ramp all the way through the mouth of the cave, and behind her, as a guide, are all the students following her all the way down into the dark, deep, and beautiful recess of the cavern. And what she allows the students to do is to discover the beauty of the cavern, the beauty of the stalagmites and the stalactites and of the soda straws and of the bacon and all the ribbon and all the stuff that they can discover on their own. And she guides them through that learning process. How much more rich and amazing is that learning when they get to discover it, when they're active, and when they're guided by the teacher. So this is exactly how we need to teach our students. We allow them to experience Scripture, allow them to be active in the learning, allow them to get the meaning and the connection of the text into their own lives. And this is what we need to be about as educators.